Hi, everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Sorry about last week.
No, no problem, no problem. It was all right.
Cool.
I wasn't fast enough. I was last minute change, so it was okay.
Cool. All right, we'll give it a few minutes for folks to join, and then we'll get started. Hey, Josh. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going okay. How about you?
Good, good. Just getting back to it after a long weekend.
Yep.
All right, we'll just give it another minute, and then we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
Okay. So I think, Hector, you have the first 2 points on the agenda. Why don't you take the floor?
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I will be quick. It was more or less to gather a bit more of feedback or historical feedback based on QFed, the decisions, and 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 so forth. So one of the things that we are seeing at D2IQ, where we are using QFed, is we are mainly using to federate resources, right? To manage where resources are being deployed, which clusters, and a bit managing the life cycle. But while trying to investigate deeper into the core of QFed, I found that there is like a service DNS record, and also I mean has been shown in many demos on QFed. My impression with this controller is like is doing a task that probably at the time when QFed appeared was quite necessary and might be really an important feature right now. But I don't know if it's only me or I see that there are many other services on Kubernetes ecosystem that could be used regardless that matter of having services across multiple clusters and how these will import export that make a reference to the services cap um, by Jeremy. So yeah, I mean, I think maybe fits of the past, but I don't. My impression is that there are so many tools, service mesh or whatever other tools that you can use in order to coordinate how you expose services across clusters that probably might not be part of the core of QFed, or that's my impression. So I wanted just to gather your thoughts about that.
So the I think the history of that feature is that Federation V1 had a feature like that, and the folks from Huawei were interested in having that feature again in KubeFed or Federation V2. I I will just call out that feature, like all the other KubeFed features, is alpha. So I completely understand the question, since we are doing work that has a high degree of overlap with it. I think the people that are putting the work in should be able to self-determine, but my own subjective opinion as an individual is there's no need to refine that feature or carry it forward, especially if there's something that's more widely available outside of KubeFed that that will work for the same use case. But I think it comes down to like, what do the folks that are putting the work in want to do? I will just add that, like, I had personally hoped to avoid building tons of features in KubeFed that only worked with one another. My original hope had been that we would build things that you could take or leave as you wanted, without installing like a big monolith that gave you a bunch of stuff. So I think the way that we've been doing the multi-cluster services and the work API stuff is a lot more representative of what I had originally hoped to do with Federation. So for me personally, if it came out, I don't think that's a loss.
All right. Yeah. I mean, that is, I wanted to bring to the table to see, but yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah, I will say it. I mean, if that comes to the time being of kind of removing it or duplicate it, I will say it for sure to the rest of the people in the channel, or also in the repo, that they are involved for doing things on the repo. And the other point that kind of related, but not fully, it's we are using the tool, right? And we were encountering situations where you really need to get a better status report of the state of the resources that you create across classes, right? You have 5,000 resources across many clusters. Then you, for instance, certain objects that you don't really need to know if it was created is okay, but you really need to know when it failed to the creation. But this is more related to what we have right now, which is in the KubeFed natives, is called propagation status. So that is there, and you can use it. But the next step, or where you need troubleshooting resources to deploy across multiple clusters, we saw that KubeFed, or at least the way of the federated resources are structured, need to have a property or field in order to be able to troubleshoot the status. And when I mean the status, mean an example, it could be a deployment, right? In a deployment, you need to know whether you have all the replicas running, or maybe one replica now error, or maybe not all the replicas that have been created because one is pending to be scheduled and stuff. So of course, the idea behind this is to improve the troubleshooting of federated resources, including somehow the status of these resources, or at least the resources that they are not healthy or not ready. In order to do that, I have a kind of a cap while almost done, is to rely on some new changes that has been normalized or standardized in order to use conditions and a certain interface on Kubernetes to determine when a resource is when a condition is true, so that you can easily, independently of the type of the resource, you can be sure to determine if it's ready or not. So yeah, just to sum up, the question is, has ever come into the thoughts of KubeFed to improve the reporting of the status of the federated resources?
So we debated doing that. I don't have that that conversation spooled into memory, but one of the trade-offs that I think you should consider, if you consider enriching the status information of like the federated resources with the actual status of the resources that are deployed, is that you are likely to put an upper bound on how many resources you could deploy from a single federated resource, because you will hit the etcd size limit much faster if you try to aggregate the status of all the resources onto the federated resource.
In this case, it's not to add let's say the status of all, but basically rely on the status that they are not ready, right? Somehow. And so that was the idea, because indeed that could be a scalability, or it could be a necessary information, right? To show the status of something that you expect to be ready, but you don't really need to have that, right? So
did you mention that you have like a write-up of a proposed change?
Yeah, I have it. I'm finishing, but yeah, I can share it, and probably with that it's easier for everyone to see what we are trying to do.
Yeah, I would be happy to read the write-up.
All right. Okay, I will do that. All right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Cool. Was that it for the first two bullets then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I believe that I put the next one on. I've gotten a couple pings from folks on steering committee drawing our attention to an issue on the org repo that concerns like cluster registry not being actively maintained. I don't think we need to make a snap decision here, but we should talk about what we think is the best thing to do. So from just my own subjective opinion, I think cluster registry as an idea is like deceptively simple to kind of imagine. And then when you try to build whatever you think that is, it's much, much harder. I have come to think that it was the wrong starting point for the work that we previously did to start with a registry. I would much rather work backwards. So for example, if we play the movie forward on some of the work happening now, the multi-cluster services work has like basically dodged or like not been dependent on a registry, which I think was a smart way to articulate that. Where I could see it being related is with work API. So if we play the movie forward, and I don't think Valerie's here. That's too bad, since she's been working on it. But if we play the movie forward on like the work API stuff that Valerie has been doing or driving, I could see the concept of a registry being involved if we play that a couple steps forward and think about how do we schedule work to happen where. At the same time, I frankly do not think that the current state of cluster registry is especially useful to anybody. It's not clear like what you get by using it, and it's not clear even how to use it. So I don't want the present state of that thing to hold this group back. So I'm not sure exactly what those opinions add up to, but those are mine. Anybody else got an opinion on this?
Your point about the work API is kind of a good one, but I wonder too, like keeping the current cluster registry around seems like it might inadvertently steer that implementation to be based on it versus, you know, evolving into whatever is best for the work API.
Yeah. And I'm completely with you. That's that's sort of what I was thinking when I said I wouldn't want the current state of cluster registry to like weigh down any of our current work. I'm not sure that I think it should be archived like right at this moment, but at a minimum, we should probably put a note on the cluster registry explaining what the history was, and that maybe explaining that we may be working back up to it is something that we could do. We could also archive it and I don't know, unarchive it or create a Kubernetes SIGs repo, which I think probably if we had a totally blank slate and we felt there was a need to have something like a cluster registry, it would probably become a Kubernetes SIGs project. Kubernetes SIGs didn't exist when cluster registry was created. So it might be something to do to just archive the one that we have with a note explaining the history. And if we want to build something like that, we can make a new one in Kubernetes SIGs. Just some food for thought. I definitely think this is something that like we shouldn't unilaterally do or shouldn't do based on one conversation in one SIG meeting. So as an action item, I will mail the distribution list for the Google group for this SIG, but wanted to see if folks had opinions readily available on that.
Sounds good.
Okay, if that's it for that topic, Jeremy, I think you've got the floor.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so our last few conversations have been really productive, so I figured it would be good to kind of keep that going here. So last week we got the first big PR merge for the KEP, which is great, and then I posted another one with a bunch of updates based on the conversations we've had here, conversations on the other PR. But I figured like it would be good probably to just kind of walk through the CRDs as they're shaping up and kind of dig into some of the details that we surface along the way, if that works for everyone.
I think that sounds great.
Cool. Paul, can you let me screen share?
Yes, that reminds me that I need to see if there's something that I can do to make that on by default. All right, you should be able to do it now.
Awesome, I can. All right. All right, is that showing up properly?
Looks like it.
Cool. So yeah, so the service export hasn't changed much, I think, in the last little while. It's basically just a status with conditions. But I think some of the conditions have kind of evolved. So I just wanted to call out that, yeah, the actual structure, I don't want to spend too much time on because the plan is to use the new standard conditions model from KEP 1623 as soon as that's implemented. Unless there's a really good reason not to, it seems like we should just kind of follow suit and kind of go with what will hopefully be the new standard. But so there's a few conditions we've kind of been talking about, and I want to start from the bottom actually, because I think this relates to the headless conversation that we had a couple weeks ago. So we had talked about the idea that a headless service or a service would be headless if all exported services that make up that supercluster service are headless, and there would be a supercluster IP otherwise. So, you know, I'll get to how we can show that on a service import later, but I think basically the thinking is that we should have a condition for headless that is true or false based on the derived state of that service import. But also that this is a good place to kind of surface if there's any disagreement, because we're opening up this opportunity for there to be a mismatch potentially. And I think that's kind of interesting because the headless services, like a service is going to be headless or not, it's probably a mistake if you have any disagreement. I'm not sure I really see a case for, you know, where you'd want to have a service that that becomes headless or becomes a supercluster IP, like that really starts feeling like a new service. So this would be kind of an error state that you want to have some way to diagnose this issue. When you create a service export, you look at status. If it's headless, false, and you see that there's, the message contains some information about mismatching clusters, that's probably something you want to fix.
So this brings up a question that I don't think we've talked about before. Correct me if I'm wrong. Here's the question. Should there be an owner ref between the service and the service export?
Yeah, we haven't really talked about that. So
we might want to just keep that plate spinning, but like the kind of life cycle interactions that you just brought up begged the question, I think.
I think yeah, like there could definitely be an owner ref between service export and service. Like if you delete the service, you probably want any exports to be deleted too. That actually seems pretty reasonable to me. I don't know if anyone disagrees with that.
So good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
The service export tends to be written by some person or from the human derived side, right? It's some human or CI system that's indicating this service is to be exported. I've not seen high fidelity of humans using owner refs properly. Are we assuming then that we would come back through and write the owner ref from the controller? It's not, I don't know if it's the worst thing ever. I just don't know what the precedent there is.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say that seems like the only way we'd be able to reliably make that true. But yeah, because humans aren't probably going to populate that.
Yeah, it seems a little bit sketchy to me that we would come through on something that, if I went in and I created this thing and you come in and say, yeah, well, I'm actually going to take it over. And, if you do something else, I'm going to delete this thing for you.
Right.
I don't know. It doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know what the precedent here is.
I can't readily think of any precedent for an operation like that off the top of my head. And since in my own head, it's entirely possible that like service and service export might be delivered by different pipelines. It seems like we probably don't want one of those things being deleted to make the other get GC'd. Like that seems like breaking the boundary but between pipelines that would be delivering it.
Yeah, so maybe the answer is just to
no.
document it.
Yeah. Or
maybe we just document it and say, if you want these things associated, like everything else, you can set the owner ref.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think this needs to be something that we do automatically.
So, so I went through your PR just this morning, and I guess you haven't seen my comments yet. I have a general question on conditions. It's not just for you, it's for David and everybody who's trying to write about conditions, which is sort of what principle makes us decide whether something is a condition or not. Like it feels like invalid service type isn't a condition, it's really just a status field. But I don't know, I'm applying my own sort of mental.
Yeah.
I think that like plane has never been well articulated in any writing I've ever read on conditions. It's certainly not well articulated in the existing API conventions. Yeah, I think that is a general question.
I've asked David in his writing to think about that, and I know Evan Anderson from the Knative world is trying to also write about conditions, and I keep asking the same question, not getting a really good answer. Like, what is the principle that stops me from turning every single status field into a condition?
Yeah, I mean the one. So yeah, I don't think there really is a consistent principle. I think normally things become conditions if they you know, if it's basically a Boolean that has some human consumable message and may or may not actually need to be exist. So like maybe it's a condition if it doesn't always apply, but then there's things like, you know, pod ready and whatnot that are obviously that don't follow that at all. I don't know
So
if there
there's some
really is a
clear,
consistent model.
there's some clear anti-patterns in how it's been used in the past. What I'm really looking for is how we should continue to use or abuse it in the future. Like my feeling, and I don't know how much traction this is going to get, but the principle that I sort of go with is similar to what you just said. If it's optional, condition might be reasonable. If it's something you can state about every single instance, it probably doesn't need to be a condition. The counter argument I've heard is, well, conditions have timestamps, and these are these sort of nice properties. My counter to that is, if we think timestamps on fields is useful, we should add that to the machinery overall, not make everything into a stringly typed Boolean.
Right. So I think it's more than that, though. It's also that human readable message, right? Like because I agree with you about timestamps. You know, maybe if every field should have a timestamp, then that's something we care about. We should. That's a separate problem to solve. But conditions also provide, you know, the human readable message as well, and that's something that we probably wouldn't want on every field.
That's what events are for.
Yeah.
But events aren't super reliable, right? Like they get cleaned up and.
Sure, but if you're writing a controller, you should be reissuing that event every time you loop.
It's true. So I don't have a good answer. I do think, though, like of this list, like initialized and exported seem like they're probably actually not conditions. Those are probably just status.
So exported is actually the interesting one, because the timestamp is interesting.
Right.
Because exported is not a one-way thing, right? Like you're exporting continuously. Every time there's endpoint slices change, you need to re-export. So like, I think I asked in one of the drafts of the CAP, like, what does exported really mean? Like it's not a one-way latch. So the timestamp there, I think, is what makes exported interesting. Otherwise, I would say exported doesn't belong at all, because it actually doesn't have any consistent meaning.
Right. I completely agree. And so the timestamp of the last change, and if there's any clusters that it wasn't exported to, for example, might be something that you want to communicate there. But still, that's a case where this seems like you'll always have this on every export. So maybe it isn't a condition. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with having an exported timestamp, right?
So
well.
I'm not sure.
Yes.
Like putting aside the formulation, like the question of what's the decision plane for field versus condition, I'm not sure exported is like the exact right way to model this. I would think of the status that we could definitely provide being, have I written the most recent, did my most recent write operation succeed? Where that doesn't necessarily mean that it was exported to every cluster, but it means that I could write what I needed to write, and I'd probably want to know, like, not necessarily when I felt something had been exported, but when there was a problem doing that right.
Right. So I guess the things that I'd care about, that kind of trying to rephrase what you're saying, are probably like the time, obviously the time it was last read, probably the observed generation from the controller, and then whether or not it was successful. Like if there was an error, and if there was an error, what the error was.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to propose that we should actually set up a formal API review. Like, I don't think I've gone through this with my fine-toothed API reviewer comb on. Anyway. And it might actually make sense to get someone who isn't as close to this as I am to review it from an API point of view. I don't want to volunteer anybody, but Jordan pops to mind. So it might make sense to schedule in the very near term, like a more comprehensive, like, let's just look at it from an API conventions and semantics point of view. Does it seem to fit with where we're going?
I think that's a good idea. I'm sure that like Jordan and David could ask a lot of thought-provoking questions at a minimum.
Yep.
Even without
that
being
makes
experts in the context, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that anytime.
So let's make sure that we get through the conditions that are on here. Modulo, the ones we've already talked about. So invalid service type, did we talk about that one?
We haven't talked about this time. We kind of mentioned that before, but if like an external name service is something that's never going to be exportable, so that's where you'd want to use this.
This feels like, so like with the strange attractor of like, what's the decision plane? Here's one thing that was in my head as we were like talking about that question. I feel like if you start out like in your API design and say something is like a status field, and then you add the fields for conditions, pragmatically, it should probably just be a condition. And I could see this being a condition.
Yeah, this one seems like it's usually not going to be there. Like something went wrong. This is a mistake. That, you know, that kind of only required sometime part of conditions, like invalid service. Yeah, I agree. It seems like a condition. Like most of the time, anytime you've deployed anything properly or you didn't use external name, this would be, it would be a valid service. So this doesn't need to always be on status. That's kind of my take.
I feel like also if it's there, you probably want the kind of supplemental information that you'd be able to get from the different fields of a condition.
Right. Yeah. What exactly went wrong?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Like I don't mean to be down on conditions, but like it feels like an expensive way to have a bool.
But it's not just a bool, right? Like it is a bool, but then there's also like timestamp that the bool's valid as of. There's supplemental information like, do you want someone to have to like go and look at the actual service, or do you want there to be a message in the status that says this is what's wrong with this thing?
Right.
I mean, again, we shouldn't do this now because we can spend all day going in circles because I'm kind of down on conditions, and I know that that's not universally held. So I'm really going to try to hold our feet to the fire and say, why isn't this just a bool and an event? And every time I loop through, I say, hey, this thing still isn't valid. False, send an event, right? I mean, we put it like comparatively, we do this all over the place for things like service load balancers. We just throw events and say, hey, this isn't working or that's not good. We don't treat every single thing as a condition.
So you would have like a Boolean field on the status and like have in the Open API doc for that field that says, if this is true, you need to look at the events.
Something like that. I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking out loud at this point.
Honestly, that is a model that we use elsewhere, and like it seems like that serves most of the same purpose as conditions, right? We've just kind of got two ways of implementing this.
Yeah, I know that David with his standardized condition stuff, and I know Eric Toon and others are trying to come up with actual guidance for like when and how to use conditions, and I will align with whatever we decide overall. I'll disagree and commit at some point, but we haven't actually got consensus on it yet. I think this is fine. We can leave it the way it is for now, but as we proceed, we should keep an eye on that discussion because I think we are an exemplar of it.
Right, and to me, it would, if we decided that we were going to go with just like a Boolean and events, and that was going to be the norm, that would make sense too. I don't think, like, I think that communicates all of the information we would want to communicate as well. But agreed that we shouldn't do that now. We should have a kind of follow-up on what that's looking like. And then the last one on here, just because it's been in here since the beginning, is this initialize. And honestly, I don't really think this adds a lot of value. I think the other three kind of communicate the information that you'd want. Like if a service is not exported and there was an error, that's where you'd have communicate any initialization problems.
I think that makes sense.
Cool. That one was easy. Awesome. That's all the conditions for the export, I think. But yeah, maybe it is just time to have a more formal API review. I don't know. We can keep going kind of through the rest of the CRDs today, but
I wanted to ask I asked a question on my review this morning on headless. Is the intention here then that the controller will push back information to every export if any other export is triggering like, I don't understand when this is set.
So yeah, I was trying to figure out how to say this concisely, but headless is true, or so this is a Boolean. If anything is headless, this condition will be there. It will be true if everything is headless, and it'll be false otherwise. It will, but it only needs to have any message, and maybe this is a better event if there's any disagreement. This is something where, like, if I create a service export and I have a cluster IP and I'm exporting a cluster IP service to an otherwise headless supercluster service, I would want to know basically this, be able to look at that export status and see that I'm breaking something.
So you're trying to, I see, yeah, because the rule was that if anybody has a VIP, then everybody has a VIP, right? But
Right.
You're saying if you're the bad actor here, you need to know about it. But I guess it's unclear what the intention was at that point, so you just have to tell everybody?
Yeah. I mean, but presumably this is a short-lived scenario, because I really can't see a case where this would be, like, you wouldn't want this, right? So yes, it would be chatty, but something has gone very wrong, and like your deployment is almost definitely broken somewhere and not doing what you expect if you have a disagreement.
So let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Why should this be on export and not on import? I
think, so putting it on import, because I was thinking about this too, like, so this is not what we would check to see if the consumer should treat it as a headless service, right? Like, I'm assuming DNS or anything would use, and kubeproxy, of course, will use the service import. But this is when I create a service export, right after creating it, if I look at the status and see what it's done, I'd want to see if I've basically broken anything. Otherwise, if we put this status on service import, which would be an option, I would have to then go check an import after creating an export to see if it's still functioning. And that seems wrong. Like, I would like to look at the thing I created to know if it's functioning the way I expect.
Okay, so I guess another question would be, what controller is going to write that condition? Because it implies that you have that the controller that's writing that condition has knowledge of all the exported services across every part of the supercluster, right?
And I think this would be the same controller that creates your service import.
Okay, that would make sense. So again, we have I don't know, an unstated assumption that somebody's going to go off and look at this versus something like an event, which would be reoccurring, right? Like,
right.
At least an event I can throw monitoring against. Like, I could say, alert me if there's a number of events, right? Or events,
right.
Any events of this type. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud again. It feels weird to backpopulate it, but I think I see what you're going for.
Yeah, and events versus conditions shouldn't be mutually exclusive, right? Like, we have symmetry between conditions and events all over the place.
maybe what Tim's getting at is that's confusing.
No, I just don't really know what the done thing is anymore because I've lost track of all the different ways people are using and abusing conditions.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when you're ready, condition for your pod is set to true, you also get an event, as far as I know, as one example.
Right, and when things are failing, you also get an event continuously, of course, as you know, as long as they're failing.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
the condition
to
isn't
me,
updated unless.
That seems like this would be a match. Here would be the controller. Again, they don't need to be mutually exclusive. That's a good point. But the controller would be throwing an event against this service export saying, "Hey, you're what's the right phrasing? You're being overridden. Your preference is being overridden, right?
Yeah,
it's not.
And I
it's
think
not
that
a
actually
vote,
makes sense.
Right.
Right. Like I think even with this condition, there should be an event that's continuously thrown as long as this mix match state exists. And the condition would tell you when that state became true or when it was fixed.
Okay, we can cover that when we get to the real API review, but that seems reasonable. Unfortunately, there isn't a really clear way to document sort of what events are going to come through because it's not it's explicitly not part of the API.
Right.
And,
I mean, maybe we do need to document this event because it seems like a more critical one. But yeah, I think.
So since we just have a few minutes left, Jeremy, I'm not sure if you ever recounted to the group like what type of reception you had gotten from engaging SIG network about changes to the kube proxy. Maybe we went over that last time, but and if we did, that's my bad. But I wanted to make sure that we had read out the latest status of that.
Yeah, no, we haven't gone over it actually because that meeting with them was right after our last, the last time we talked about this. So reception was pretty good for having kube proxy understand the CRD. So this means we would have an out of tree client and CRD for the MCS API. We'll probably have to set it up in staging so that it can be consumed by kube proxy, but basically, yeah, kube proxy will understand service import, the CRD if present, and configure supercluster IP routing as necessary, just like it does with service. And then, you know, we continue to use endpoint slice just like today with our own label, but all of this would be supported by kube proxy. That went over fairly well.
I'm a little surprised that they'd be willing to modify the kube proxy to be sensitive to a CRD, but I think it makes the most sense right now to factor this API as CRDs. So that's good.
Yep. Also, I think that's the direction that things are going, right? Like we want more core-ish concepts to be, as long as they're optional, to be expressed by a CRD. So it kind of makes sense. I guess the one thing to be aware of is I believe we'll be the first example of this, but hopefully not the last. But I think we're also, you know, if you look at the fact that we really are an optional add-on and we don't have a lot of close tie-in with other core things, I think we're a really good candidate for this.
Yeah, it certainly sets us up for being able to prototype it more easily since we can do this in tree in the kube proxy, right?
Right, which is great because yeah, it would be very hard for us to get, you know, the performance and stability that we want, and also not to impact existing services if we had our own component kind of munging IP tables, for example, on top of kube proxy. So I think this sets us up well.
Awesome. Was there other content that you wanted to get through? We're technically at time for this meeting now.
I know, I think this was really productive. I think this was good. I think anything else, I think, yeah, we should probably set up a more detailed API review. Obviously sooner would be great, because I think every time we get together, these discussions, they've been very helpful. I don't know what makes the most sense for doing that, how we go about that.
I think we could just probably ask David and Jordan directly.
Okay. Cool, I'll reach out.
All right.
Yeah, see if we can schedule something, and we can do some pre-read and then sit and review together. We probably don't need Jordan and David unless they're both particularly interested, but just having somebody who brings external eyes would be useful.
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great day, and see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.